Welcome to the second episode of Battlefield 4 Hardcore Meta, and the first one to cover primary weapons. In this episode, we are covering a number of things, primarily two PDWs, the MX4 and MPX, the two workhorse PDWs in the game, fulfilling the role of a close quarters SMG type weapon without any major focus outside of that. But as a result of this being the first primary episode and first engineer episode, I will also touch on a number of additional topics that overlap and that I've not discussed before. A bit on primary's red dot sights and 1X sights, some general knowledge on PDWs, and most importantly the engineer's launchers and anti-vehicle tactics. Let's first take a look at the unlock requirements for the PDWs. For the MX4, you will have access to this gun by default. For the MPX, you have to have the Dragon's Teeth DLC, which comes with premium, and you have to complete the Not the Weakest Link assignment, requiring you to obtain 2 PDW ribbons to link 10 points in the game mode Chain Link, and to get the Squad Order Followed award 10 times. None of these requirements are difficult per se, but getting 10 points linked in the Chain Link game mode might require figuring out what servers even run the game mode, as it's not particularly popular. I have seen it at least once during the production of these videos in a server's list of maps and modes on PC, but I've not seen it actually played, unfortunately. The game has a resurgence of new players ever since the Steam release of BF4, so it's likely there are going to be more servers running it to help out new players obtain the weapon, so keep an eye out. Now let's look at the common and similar traits and what they mean in the meta context of PDWs and carbines. Carbines are often the immediate category of weaponry to compare to PDWs, if engineers want a fully automatic with their engineer class, as carbines trade hipfire performance for better range, making them often better choices in large conquests, where engineers tend to be one of the most important classes. It's important to compare them and understand what you're getting with a PDW as opposed to a carbine. These two PDWs both have the same narrow hipfire cone of 1.5. Paired with the weapon's RPM and damage also makes for good hipfire performance overall. It's not the best possible. In fact, most other PDWs beat their performance in this regard, some cases by a lot, but it's significantly better than any carbine. You should generally rely on these weapons in close ranges where they are going to be their strongest. They also have the same starting accuracy of 0.4, standard for PDWs, but overall poor to mediocre among engineer automatics. Standing still and firing really isn't the main way to get the absolute most out of these guns. They also have the same movement accuracy of 0.6, which is also standard for PDWs, which at first glance might seem good overall compared to carbines, but because they're PDWs, you also get improved movement speed while aiming down sight. For most guns, you move at 50% walk speed, but with bullpups and any PDWs, you move at 75% walking speed while aiming and moving. Sounds great, but also as a result, this actually affects the magnitude of the move penalty, making it more or less a mediocre overall moving accuracy when compared to all of your options, including the carbines that move more slowly. It's just that you move faster in this case while aiming. Aim strafing with these guns is still very much worthwhile. In fact, it's recommended for more engagements than standing still. They also have the same exact upwards recoil of 0.36, which leans on the poor side. Combined with other poor to mediocre recoil stats and PDW accuracy, results in guns that, while not hard to control, do require some adaptation. That said, like all PDWs except for the PDWR, they also have the same recoil decrease of 20. This is standard for PDWs, but also the best among automatics you get for the engineer. They also have the same kill capacity, because of an identical 30-round magazine and identical number of hits to kill over range. Assuming you get kills within the 3-shot kill range and never miss a shot, this comes to 10 1/3 kills. This is pretty standard for automatics for the engineer, and it's a fairly healthy amount of ammo. And finally, they both have a largely average deploy time of 0.67 seconds. there's only one PDW with a better deploy time, the PP2000, but this stat ends up not being impressive because more than 2/3 of all carbines and PDWs have the same exact deploy time anyway. That said, switching to one of these from, say, your launcher shouldn't place you at too notable of a risk. The following stats are not exactly the same, but similar enough that they contribute to the weapons functioning similarly to each other in terms of role. Some of these stats do help differentiate to some degree when combined with more notable differences we'll get into later, however. Both weapons have very similar and bad first shot recoil multipliers. A multiplier of 2.3 for the MX4 and 2.4 for the MPX. What this stat does is multiply the recoil of the first shot in a fully automatic burst, resulting in this case with a notably worse recoil for that first shot than the rest of the following shots. This stat has a major influence on the accuracy of a weapon. Combining with these weapons' other poor recoil values, and you get weapons that certainly buck noticeably. However, the slightly less terrible value of the MX4 makes it a somewhat better choice for longer ranged shots. Further elaborating on this trend that the MX4 is slightly better for longer shots, its overall side-to-side recoil is lower, of 0.64, whereas the MPX has an overall value of 0.72. The MPX's side-to-side, however, is equal in either direction. The recoil of the MX4, on the other hand, is lopsided to the left, with its left side recoil being about 46% stronger, making it a technically more precise horizontal recoil overall, but it requires learning some proper recoil adjustment from the player to capitalize on that slight improvement. Another similar stat between these two is their fairly good RPM values. The MX4 has a cyclic rate of 830 rounds per minute, while the MPX has a firing rate of 850. The MX4's slightly lower rate of fire further contributes to the weapon's slightly improved controllability compared to the MPX at the cost of time to kill. But make no mistake, it's still a pretty fast firing weapon. Finally, the spread increase and decrease values are pretty similar. These stats affect how fast your accuracy blooms when you're aiming down your sights and firing. Sitting pretty much smack dab in the middle of both PDWs and carbines, the MPX has an increase of 0.099 and a decrease of 10.6, and the MX4 has a minusculely improved set of values of 0.097 for the increase and 11.2 for the decrease. This further emphasizes the MX4's leaning into longer range, though this difference won't likely be frequently noticeable given how little of a difference there really is here. Finally, the last major stat that is extremely similar, these weapons' damage model. In fact, you might notice this chart applies to both of them despite not being exactly the same. That is because these have functionally a standard PDW damage model with the same number of hits to kill over range. Where the damage technically differs is that the MPX does exactly 2 points of additional damage up to 13 meters, where the damage then begins to drop and then meets up with the MX4's damage model exactly starting at 20 meters. This won't affect time to kill unless you run into a freak scenario where your target has taken a very specific amount of damage already and is within 20 meters. Otherwise, the damage model for both results in a 3-shot kill anywhere to the body up to 23 meters. If you manage nothing but 3 chest shots, this will bump up to 28 meters. A headshot and chest shot results in a kill up to 31 meters. Managing 2 headshots can land you a kill out to 48 meters. 4 shots anywhere to the body gets you a kill out to 41 meters, and 5 shots anywhere on the body will get you a kill at any range the projectile is still flying. This hits to kill chart applies to a little over half of all PDWs, really, making it a very standard PDW damage model. And it's also largely middle of the road, as there are a few lower damage PDWs and higher damage PDWs. Probably more importantly, a lot of these range values actually surpass carbines by a few meters in a number of the closer range values, with carbines hit to kill performance starting to do a little better beyond 30 meters and much better beyond 41 meters. Otherwise, PDWs will generally require a fewer number of shots to kill at some points along its range profile between 20 and 30 meters, so you don't only get better hipfire values with PDWs. Now let's touch on the two major ways in which these weapons differ from one another, which are going to be stats that tell the story of two diverging PDW playstyles and combat roles. The main thing that the MPX has over the MX4 is a doozy, especially for PDWs, since their ideal ranges tend to be closer, putting you in the heat of combat. The MPX has a drastically better set of reload speeds, and seeing as they also effectively share damage models and kill capacities, this gives it a flat-out better ammo reliability overall. At 2.1 seconds for tactical and 2.55 empty, the MPX can do an excellent job of keeping you in the fight and battle ready. Its reload stats are better than 2/3 of the carbines and PDWs in the game. Further, the empty reload is not proportionally punitive, which can benefit ammo conservation in hardcore if you'd rather wait until the end of the magazine, or even if you like to pre-fire or suppressive fire a lot. And combined with that fairly nice time to kill, it ends up often being considered the best PDW in the game by many people for its well-rounded stats. It's worth looking for that server that runs Chainlink to unlock it. The MX4, on the other hand, suffers greatly in this department. With a fairly sluggish tactical reload of 2.6 seconds and an absolutely terrible empty reload of 3.6 seconds, the weapon can put you in a dire situation if you fire it until dry. In fact, I generally strongly advise that you always reload after a second kill, or if you fire the weapon for more than a solid second or so. And even then, you minimize risk by reloading even more frequently. Its empty reload is the second worst out of all carbines and PDWs combined. The MX4, you might have noticed, in general has been fairly consistently painting a picture of a slightly more accurate PDW. And the stat that most drastically sets it positively apart from the MPX is its bullet velocity. At 390 meters per second, it's roughly about 15% faster than the MPX, which has a notably sluggish bullet velocity of 340 meters a second. Unfortunately, looking at the full meta of carbines and PDWs, this still isn't necessarily that impressive of a stat. A full 2/3 of the rest of your options for fully automatics beat this velocity. That said, the MX4's various other improved controllability and accuracy over the MPX does also further indicate it's a gun that wants to be used the farther extent of its effective range. And if you do so, this would also simultaneously help mitigate some of the risks with those slow reloads. Finally, let's get to the barrel and grip suggestions. Despite these two guns being generally pretty statistically similar, the more major differences do tend to lend them to generally different roles. For underbarrel grips, the choice is the same for both for the main builds, an ergo or vertical grip, which both have the same effects on the guns. These grips reduce the movement penalty to accuracy for both aimed fire and hip fire. This synergizes perfectly with PDWs, which lean into close quarters combat and mobile firing. For the MX4, I generally advise focusing on improving the immediate accuracy and mobility. That means a heavy barrel and that aforementioned ergo or vertical grip. The heavy barrel as an option is hard to beat for PDWs, as their bottom ranking spread among primaries tends to result in a dire need for the halving of that starting spread, and general improvements to other spread affecting stats the heavy barrel provides. While the increase in upwards recoil is going to be relatively hefty in this case, recoil is something you can generally compensate for. Whereas starting spread can't be managed at all, and increased bloom requires you to potentially place yourself at risk by bursting, which will slow your time to kill. Those are fine tactics for full automatics with better damage over range, but is largely unsuitable for these more close-range PDWs. Further, having better spread makes landing headshots in closer ranges for rapid time to kill far more doable, and upwards recoil will generally only cause issues when your target is behind horizontal cover. For the MX4, maximizing a long burst's accuracy is important, considering the context in which you ought to use the gun, where some longer ranges come into play. For those longer ranges, you won't likely have time to carefully short burst for accuracy, since the long range damage is generally poor on both of these guns. However, there is one alternative build that I tested that can work pretty well and does a somewhat better job of mitigating the poor ammo reliability of the MX4 and improving its performance at the very edge of its effective range of about 25 to 30 meters. The drawbacks to this being that you can potentially slow your time to kill by emphasizing bursts, and also it promotes a less mobile playstyle. For this build, select a compensator with an angled or folding grip. The compensator has actually the best overall accuracy for the MX4 for 3-shot bursts, not the heavy barrel. You are more likely to consistently manage kills at medium ranges with bursts, as initial vertical and horizontal recoil is a slightly larger detractor in specifically medium ranges than spread increase, and you are much less likely to completely empty your magazine after a kill or two, allowing you to do much faster tactical reloads more consistently as well, assuming you carefully control your engagement ranges. The combination of the angled or folding grip's reduction to the first shot recoil and removal of the heavy barrel's up recoil penalty makes controlling those bursts much easier. To reiterate, you should now keep in mind the MX4 will become a less focused mobile combat weapon without that ergo or vertical grip. Landing headshots in much closer ranges for rapid time to kill while aimed down sights will be a little less consistent, and mobile hipfire performance will be degraded in comparison to the main build I advise, because the compensator also makes hipfire bloom worse. Pre-firing in particular is a big no-no with this build. The MPX, on the other hand, I found myself using the flash hider as soon as I unlocked it, with the strongly advised ergo and vertical grips. The MPX stats lend it to an aggressive frontline close-ranged role first and foremost, since aimed accuracy takes a back seat. I advise using the gun in a smoke and push role. The flash hider allows you to smoke an area, and then, if you are so inclined, you can pepper shots through the smoke without immediately visually revealing yourself. This is a worthwhile tactic in particular with the MPX because of its rate of fire and ammo reliability. And generally long bursts are preferable, making the spread decrease penalty that mostly affects short bursts less of a major hindrance. A suppressor would achieve the same effect for firing through smoke, quiet down your shots and keep you off the map, but the penalty to velocity reduces some level of reliability in getting hits on moving targets, which, as a more aggressive-oriented weapon, makes it a not worthwhile trade-off. For accessories, the choice is simple for both of these guns. These are PDWs, and it's a mistake to not try and improve hipfire. A laser sight of any kind is the obvious choice, with the tri-beam laser generally being the best option by a smidge for reasons I went over in my previous BF4 video, though there is no strict statistical differences between the three. Seeing as these are generally closer ranged guns in terms of sights, I suggest either an RDS or 1X. Even the MX4's slightly better accuracy is still mostly its best at ranges where any significant zoom will be more of a hindrance than an improvement. There is little meaningful difference between the various options in these two categories, other than the design of the reticule they provide and the physical housing of the sights. The thing I hear the most from Battlefield 4 players is that less housing is always better, and I generally agree, but keep in mind that more housing does at least have a fringe benefit of blocking out some instances of fairly obnoxious sun glare effects present in some BF4 maps. Even with that acknowledgement, the Coyote sight is still clearly the best option out of all of them overall. The sidearm I suggest for these two is either the 44 Magnum or the Mare's Leg. Owing to the generally poor performance beyond 30 meters, like most PDWs, a decently accurate weapon that can two-shot at any range or score a one headshot kill can help make up that difference for parts of a map that lend more to long-range combat. However, you should spend as little time out in the open with these as possible. You will still lose to long-range primaries most of the time. There is exceptions to this particular recommendation. If you're using the MX4, if instead you like to rocket snipe infantry and need a way to mitigate the MX4's poor ammo reliability, you could get away with a fast drop pistol with similar hits to kill and similar ballistic performance. The M9 is actually a fairly natural fit, with very similar damage over range and almost identical bullet velocity. And if, like me, you like to use the MPX, mostly in maps that are essentially entirely close range, you probably could get away with the G18 more as a way to continue a kill streak once you run out of primary ammo. As for the launcher to pair, for the MPX I suggest the MBT Law. This is because the Law is essentially the best anti-infantry launcher available. It has a relatively fast reload speed paired with a fairly good one-hit kill radius, making it good for aggressive play in small maps, or if you are on the attacking side in a rush match without a main battle tank to worry about, which is where the MPX will feel most at home, creating a sort of anti-infantry skirmisher class. The only time I suggest switching away from the Law is if you want to take down MAVs, in which case switch to the Stinger launcher. For the MX4, you're going to want a launcher that can deal serious damage to vehicles, as I generally suggest using the MX4 in Conquest in either medium maps or larger maps that have CQC-oriented capture points. And which you choose really depends on the threat. In medium maps where main battle tanks are an issue, the RPG-7 is my choice. The RPG-7 deals the most damage possible by a launcher, with the main drawback being that it's harder to land hits at longer range and can be dodged or blocked with active protection by savvier vehicle users. However, in Conquest, MBTs are more likely to expose their weaker rear armor to you in medium maps, or at the very least it'll be easier to flank, and that is really what the RPG is best for, dealing massive amounts of damage to MBTs from behind before they can react, preferably while you can deal additional damage quickly with a nearby stationary wire-guided launcher emplacement, instead of waiting for your RPG-7 to reload, or with slam mines if you find yourself close up. In cases where you only have to deal with infantry fighting vehicles or rush with vehicle threats, the SMA is a better choice, and the number of hits to take an IFV down won't vary much in comparison to the RPG-7 anyway. IFVs are faster moving vehicles, so it's important to minimize their ability to dodge your rockets with a faster projectile. And if you run into a main battle tank in rush, you will almost always be forced to hit their frontal armor. Tanks in rush likely will know about your attacks ahead of time, as flanking will be very difficult, making the RPG-7's damage strength less impactful and its slower projectile more of a liability. You should also keep in mind the RPG-7 and SMA are the only launchers able to be fired as a passenger in a vehicle, so if you want to act as a companion to a vehicle with seats that have open access to combat like on boats or transport vehicles, one of these are the best choice. If you find yourself beset by a variety of vehicle threats from a variety of ranges, however, the SRAW is kind of the king jack-of-all-trades launcher. Each shot doesn't deal an impressive amount of damage compared to the RPG-7 or SMA, but you can snipe with it from a very long range, owing to its wire-guided capabilities. It also synthesizes well if you have recon players who actively laser designate targets, as the SRAW can take advantage of those. Further, while it cannot deal lots of immediate damage, it works decently well in close ranges if you hip-fire the launcher, as it has the fastest reload of any of the engineer launchers that can be fired without a lock-on. It's just that you can't reload until you unscope the launcher. You can fire a shot, quickly reload it, and then fire another from another angle before most drivers can react. The wire guiding can also make landing solo hits on helicopters a bit easier, or make infantry sniping a reasonable proposition. It does deal less damage to infantry though, so keep in mind it's not a great anti-infantry skirmishing launcher like the Law. Its lower overall damage also makes it more likely that you won't get many finishing blows off on vehicles, but it will allow you to engage in almost every situation. The only drawback to this launcher is its inability to be fired while you are a vehicle passenger. As for your non-launcher gadget for the MPX, since I advise using it in smaller maps without vehicles, or often in rush game modes, the EOD bot has probably the most utility. With its ability to spy on your enemy, or even sneak in a few kills remotely, and in rush, most importantly, its ability to arm and disarm MCOMs. One way you can use the EOD bot as a defensive player is to hide it near an MCOM and activate remote control of it the moment the MCOM is armed. This can allow you to provide some defense of both MCOMs at once. It can also provide a Hail Mary disarm attempt if you die and respawn while an MCOM is still armed, as you don't lose your ability to remote control an EOD bot you placed in a previous life, as long as you don't place down a new one. For the MX4's non-launcher gadget, it depends on what type of role you're going for. If you plan on primarily hunting tanks down, I suggest the M2 slam mines for a number of reasons. For one, they can be stuck directly to vehicles, which will more properly ensure their eventual detonation directly once the vehicle moves, or even if a teammate hits one with the launcher, allowing them a more aggressive use. If you do place them in a trap-oriented manner like a conventional mine, place them up high on walls. This achieves two things. It makes the mines harder to notice by an enemy tank before it's too late, and conversely, makes it easier for friendly tanks to spot the blue friendly mine indicator, which helps to prevent your mines from harming friendly tanks, a real possibility in hardcore. Try to stick by the mines, and if they go off, you'll be informed by the vehicle damage notification, allowing you to run to the location you placed them to finish off the tank with your launcher if the target is not destroyed outright, to prevent them from fleeing and repairing. If on the other hand you'd rather play as a main battle tank or infantry fighting vehicle driver or companion gunner, there isn't really any choice but the simple repair tool as your non-launcher gadget, as the EOD bot takes too long to deploy and pick up in the heat of battle when you might need to quickly perform some emergency repairs. And if it's destroyed, you lose the ability to repair at all. Using the standard repair tool also allows you to repair boats and transport vehicles as a passenger. For the choice of grenade, the MPX goes well with smokes or flashbangs. Smokes in particular if you have the flash hider barrel equipped. This will allow you to throw a smoke down, and then if you suspect an enemy on the other side, you can fairly safely fire into the smoke without giving yourself away with muzzle flash. The MX4 I suggest the RGO Impact or M67 frag depending on the role. If you're using the M2 slams, the RGO Impact can act as a quick means of detonating them. Otherwise, the M67 can act as a quick way to discourage enemies from rushing or chasing you if you run out of ammo completely in your magazine and need to start a long empty reload. For your field upgrade, the MPX loadout does well with the offensive lineup. Right off the bat, you'll be able to sprint faster to both progress more quickly into enemy territory and dodge shots coming your way. It will also allow you to close the distance, giving you more opportunity to let the MPX shine in close quarters. The additional ammo and grenade also encourages frequent use of your smokes or flashbangs, and for you to pre-fire around corners or into smoke. The eventual reduced fall damage can also allow you to drop down on your enemies for surprise attack on occasion when CQC maps have a lot of verticality, like Flood Zone or Pearl Market, where deploying your parachute might give you away due to the noise that it makes. For the MX4, the anti-tank or mechanic field upgrade set make more sense. If you plan on tank hunting, the anti-tank set will immediately incentivize you to place some mines down, as you'll still have some in reserve if a more aggressive opportunity presents itself. Eventually having more rockets and being able to have more mines up at a given time further synthesizes well with an aggressive anti-tank focus. And the 15% reduced damage from explosives perk at the end is somewhat minor. It also synthesizes well with a class intended to fight tanks. The mechanic field upgrade's immediate improvement to repair speed is a no-brainer if you plan on being a companion to any vehicle. That you then get reduced explosive damage does assist with the overall survivability slightly, since explosive damage is likely in that context. Admittedly, after that, the final two perks end up not being particularly useful, at most just cherries on top with fringe benefits. But those first two perks synergize so well, it is a justifiable choice for the role right off the bat anyway. So there you have it, the two most basic PDWs in the game, largely being solid introductions to two different ways of using the PDWs, and that you should generally expect of the class of weapons. They aren't hyper specialized, with my suggested builds in this case being more of soft guidelines than mandates. They continue to hold some use by more experienced players when you want a little range flexibility with the MX4 or just conventional and solid PDW performance with the MPX. If you want to be informed of future video releases by me, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell for notifications. Also consider liking the video if you enjoyed it. If there is something I missed, or you think I got wrong, or if you just want to contribute to discussion, please feel free to comment as well.